No, I mean that's basically. I mean, he meant that in a whole, that in the court system, a jury, a grand jury, these 23 men at the time, but now men and women, could change the entire country.
We can take it all back.
Absolutely,
we can totally rewrite it all.
The entire thing. I mean, right from the ground up.
And that's
I don't.
I guess that's what they're afraid of, and what people don't understand is really how much power we have. I mean, people know it sort of in a, in a spiritual sense. I'm a creature of God and this and that, and I am above, all other men. Not above, but I'm equal with all other men and all that. But are we actually behaving that way? A very few people, such as yourself, have actually taken steps to actually walk that talk, and you're seeing more and more people. I guess because it has pushed so ridiculously, absurdly far that people are searching for. There must be a solution to this, and it's really good news. That's what I would like the audience to catch on. For as miserable as things may seem, it's really not hard to flip this whole thing upside down and get it on its head. But it's going to start with education and understanding and breaking through and understanding this, which is why we're doing this show right now, to try and just at least lay down a foundation of how we got where we are. I'd like to talk about, the Civil War, the 14th Amendment. I'd like you to explain that for. Go on.
Before we get there,
yeah.
You touched on a topic with Badnarik, and this is 100% factual information, and I have read it myself. I have seen the 13th Amendment, and it is not to free the slaves.
Right.
In the 13th Amendment, it enumerated that if you took the swearing oath and joined the royal court, that you liquidated all your sovereign rights at that moment.
That's...
And
okay, go on.
Basically, at that moment, if you did so, you were no longer allowed to be president, governor, a congressman, nothing. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't be a public servant for free, sovereign, independent people. And that's basically what the 13th Amendment said. Now, as it was assembled, and the Congress basically said, "Yep, this is the ticket right here. We're gonna lick our thumb and put our thumbprint right on there, and we're gonna send it out." So it went into storage to be utilized and sent out to be ratified by the many states. Well, this was 1811. Well, this is the reason why they call it the War of 1812, because they don't want to tell you. They don't want to tell you who the bad guy is.
Okay.
The bad guy is the British Empire, who in Philadelphia was the original capital of this of America. So the British Empire invaded through North America because they knew what this amendment would do if it was going to be ratified by the states, and that's why they fought a huge, costly war, huge, costly engagement to take Philadelphia and burn the capital to the ground, where the amendment was being kept to be sent out for ratification.
Oh my goodness.
This is what the 1812 war was all about. This is what Badnarik talks about, and this is why when it came to the peace talks between them again, they said that this ratification, this law, could not be law. And we then ceded, the government did, and agreed that they would strike that law down and not proceed with it with its natural due course. So that's what happened to the original 13th Amendment, and it did recognize exactly that they were British royalty, and they were lawyers, and they had to go.
Interesting. So they just use their iron fist. When we wake up and figure it out, they come in and use the iron fist. But we're going to break through. Okay, so shall we go into the Civil War, the 14th Amendment? Because I think this is very interesting for people that are U.S. citizens, and people fight to get U.S. citizenship, and you have no idea what you're fighting for because it is a trap inside of a trap inside of a trap. So...
And what's even funnier, I think, when we talk about this trap, it's a huge trap to the world, because in all honesty, what they teach them, what they educate them on, it's a bait and switch. They hand them the original Constitution, the original, with all the freedom and independent and ideology and everything that goes with it, and that's what they teach them. This is America, this is America, and this is why the world hates us, because they're educated on the original Constitution, and they look at us and they go, Well, that's not what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing something totally different.
Mm-hmm.
But what they do is they educate the public. Come to America. Come to America. Be an American. Be free. Be independent. La, la, la. And then they hand you a U.S. citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
Which is nothing more than saying, okay, I'm changing from being this person's slave to being your slave.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it's saying.
Right.
And, that is what U.S. citizens are. And the 14th Amendment, basically what happened is all the slaves were freed. Now, ideology at the time was struggling with racism and sexism.
Mm-hmm.
And even good men were struggling with these entrenched ideas that were programmed into them
Mm-hmm.
by their predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
So they were fighting with this idea, and they said, okay, we'll just have a continental vote. And as long as we get the majority, then we will then enunciate and recognize the sovereign rights of the slaves that are now free.
Mm-hmm.
Notice they never said blacks or Negro or anything of that nature. They said slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Because what most people don't understand is there were whites and blacks and Chinese and Muslims and things on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, okay.
There were free and they were slaves. You had a large Irish slave contingency in this country, a Chinese slave contingency in this country. That's why they use the word slave.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I had heard about the Moors and that they erased their history, that the black Arabs from Africa, speaking Arabic, Muslim, came over long before the Europeans were here. They had sort of, melded in with the Indian, the Native Americans, and they lived much like them in tribes and so forth. And then when the Europeans came over, the very first slave trade was in fact from America back over to Europe. And they have essentially erased this history so that they could trick the original blacks that were in America and trick them into believing that they were not part of the original Constitution. They were not part of the first original free, independent, sovereign souls, that they were slaves and brought over from from Africa in boats and all that, and just essentially erased their history. And I think that's just fascinating. I mean, I know that I had heard that President Lincoln had a Qur'an given to him by the Moors. That Islam and so forth was in America long before the Europeans ever came over with Christianity. But that's a whole other topic, I guess. But just an interesting fact. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. That kind of a thing. But so it's
there's a lot of things there, and we could get into some uncomfortable conversation about the Moors.
Mm-hmm.
But all in all, I'll say that your information is factual, and if you actually look at the signatures on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, there are 2 signatures on there, and both of them are Moorish princes.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's one thing that has to be said. People who believe things about these groups with their hidden history, their history really isn't as hidden as people would like you to believe. And the Moors are directly responsible for not freeing the slaves when the Constitution was signed.
Interesting. Right.
They refused to give the wealth that they were offering to America to fight the revolution if the slaves were freed. Now that's reality. And people can look at a perception of it all they want, but that's reality. They refused. They said, if you free the slaves, that is why Jefferson, in the first 2 drafts of the Constitution, along with other people who had created the Constitution, some of the key members, they freed the slaves.
Okay. Interesting.
In the first 2 drafts of the Constitution, they freed the slaves, and as it went through debate, that's where it was taken out. The Moors stepped in and said, I don't think so, here's the reasons why, and I won't go into them because they're not very nice.
No, of course not, obviously not. And it's totally, but see now that's where they should have stepped in with the Constitution, because that's the part where everybody always says, how can you say everybody's free and all that, but then still have slaves? So that's where they should have held their ground for the moral righteousness. And that's probably why we're in the problem we're in today, because they sold out. They just went the cheap route, just to get the document put out there. I don't know.
Well, there was a war going on amongst the people who were creating the Constitution at the time, because some wanted a king, some wanted many different versions of government, and they agreed upon the Republic, but there was trickery on the parts of very brilliant men who wrote the document, like the statement, all men are created equal. Well, this is a political declaration. And once I've said all men, now granted we have to understand that the plight of women and the plight of blacks, but all men. They didn't name a country. They didn't name a government structure. They said all men. So this included men in Indochina, men in China, men in Russia, men in Europe, men everywhere. It meant all men.